Trump's mass deportation plans set to begin in major cities, but could face immediate backlash. Just last night, a San Diego county voted to deny aid to federal immigration enforcement. But News Nation is now confirming some migrants are starting to leave on their own, attempting to self-deport ahead of the second Trump presidency. And in the past few years, the U.S. has seen the largest immigration surge in American history, with an annual average of close to 2.5 million people. And that's just from 2021 to 2023.
Gang, you won't believe it. It's already happening. The mass deportations that President Trump has promised on day one of his presidency have already begun. We've got a brand new report out that's revealing a mass surge at the border, but this time that surge is going the other way. He's not even in office yet, gang, and it's already happening. We've got the latest. This is going to absolutely blow you away. Welcome, everyone. Come on in, one and all. I am your host, Dr. Steve, your patron professor, here to celebrate with you the rise, the dawn of the new American golden age that you made possible on November the 5th. So make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. And, you may just want to butter some popcorn for this one. You may have seen this from CBS News a few weeks back. It was a report on the Haitian migrants, particularly those in Springfield, Ohio, that were at the center of controversy during the campaign. It was a report detailing how a number of these Haitian migrants had decided, heck with it. They were just going to go back to Haiti before Trump's inauguration. They weren't going to stick around. They were not at all confident that Trump would be anywhere near as accommodating to them as the Biden administration has been. And so a number of these Haitian migrants, according to CBS, planned on leaving the country by January. Well, as it turns out, that self-deportation is becoming somewhat of a pattern of late. And no, I'm not talking about Ellen DeGeneres permanently moving to the UK. I mean, my condolences to our dear friends across the pond. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a trend that's happening among particularly illegal migrants who are increasingly cutting and running. They're not taking their chances with the incoming Trump administration and the promised mass deportations. They are taking the advice of the incoming border czar, Tom Homan, who is like the very definition of man. I mean, that guy walks into a room, I'm just like, it looks so pathetic. So they are taking the advice of border czar Tom Homan, and they are in effect deporting themselves as we speak. Take a look at this report.
What more are you learning about these apparent self-deportations?
Yeah, so what we're learning here, Nicole, is that migrants who are going through their asylum proceedings are actually cutting things short on their own, and they're finding ports of entry and they're trying to leave ahead of the possibility of Trump removing them. So migrants are actually finding Border Patrol agents or CBP officers, and they're asking them if they can leave. Here's the deal, though. Because those migrants are in actual legitimate proceedings, DHS really has no bearing here. They're in the court's hands right now. So all CBP can do is advise that they walk back to Mexico through a port of entry. They have that legal right to do that. Now, one man from Venezuela told agents that he was trying to get out before Trump gets in, and says that he heard there was an agreement with Mexico and Venezuela where they are actually helping to get people back to their home country. Now, Venezuela has not taken deportation flights back from the United States for nearly a year. Mexico does have a better working relationship with Maduro, and that might be a possibility for this young man. Now, we called the migrant stepfather in Pennsylvania, who confirmed that the migrant went back to Mexico to continue his journey to Venezuela. Interesting here, though, because they are in proceedings already, they are not self-deporting, they are self-departing. However, an immigration attorney that we talked to says that move is essentially the same thing, and they essentially issue a deportation order against themselves when they do this, and they likely will have issues coming back in if they have a valid hearing. Take a listen.
They are probably not going to be able to get back in to reapply or to start the process over. It's in many of these, asylum included, you kind of get one chance. And if you give up halfway through, you don't get to come back and ask for asylum again. You'll be put into a different type of proceeding and you won't have asylum available to you.
So, of course, all of this is coming as President-elect Trump is promising those mass deportations on day one. But obviously, not all illegal migrants are self-deporting. Some of them are actually seeking refuge in sanctuary cities across the country. We've got reports on that where they're simply relocating, hoping to hide out under the protection of more accommodating mayoral administrations. The irony, even with that, is that we're already seeing a number of once professed sanctuary cities buckle under the socioeconomic pressures and the mass chaos that the migration to their cities has caused. We all know New York Mayor Eric Adams, as I'm sure you know, it's been reported a number of times. He said that he will cooperate fully with the new Trump administration's efforts at deporting the illegal migrants that have been housed in New York for the last several months, ever since Texas Governor Greg Abbott began busing migrants by the tens of thousands into New York. That socioeconomic chaos has completely imploded Adams' commitment to making New York a sanctuary city. And we can be sure he is not the only mayor who will capitulate. And for those sanctuary city mayors who are thinking about standing up to Trump on mass migration or on the mass deportations, Homan's got a message for them. Check this one out.
Quickly, what happens to a mayor or a local police department chief that is under Democratic leadership that obstructs ICE in your federal agents that are helping get these deportations? What happens to them?
Well, first of all, if they don't want to help us get the hell out of the way, we're going to do it. If I got to send twice the amount of resources to that city, that's what we're going to do. If they would give us access to the jail, that would mean less agents in the community. For them pushing back and not letting us in the jail, it just means more agents are going to be in the community, so they're hurting themselves. Finally, I'll say this. They need to educate themselves. They need to review this. Title 8, United States Code, 1324, III. Read about that and don't cross that line, because it is a felony to harbor and conceal an illegal alien from ICE. Read the statute, don't cross that line.
That's a warning from Tom Homan, right?
Yeah, that is a warning from Tom Homan right there. And he doesn't seem to be the kind of guy that gives false warnings, does he? Now, this doesn't mean that the Biden administration is going to make this easy. They're already doing everything they possibly can to try to frustrate these efforts. You may have seen this. This is fascinating. It's being reported by the Daily Wire. Apparently, the Biden administration is ordering truckloads of unused border wall materials to be hauled away from the Arizona border and taken up north to a government auction site where people can bid on the entire border wall segment for as low as $5. I kid you not. This is reportedly an ongoing operation. One Border Patrol agent estimates that upwards of a half a mile worth of wall is being transported out of Arizona every day. I mean, it's just a petty, pathetic stunt that the Biden-Harris I should omit Harris. I mean, I should just say Biden. They don't even talk to each other anymore. It's just a petty stunt that the Biden administration is pulling to just be an annoyance to Trump. Well, annoyance, but I mean, this is going beyond annoyance. Remember back in the day when members of outgoing administrations would just steal the W, right, from all the computer keyboards? Remember that back in 2000? Well, now they actually, now they're provoking World War III before they leave, or they're selling off building material that would have been used for a border wall. I mean, these people are just beyond pathetic. Look, nevertheless, it does increasingly look like city residents have had enough of this nonsense, and therefore the future of sanctuary cities is not. In Chicago, a city that the ultra-radical cultural Marxist mayor Brandon Johnson is doing his best to destroy, residents recently gave him an earful over what they think about his sanctuary city policies.
You took an oath to uphold the Constitution, or when you took an oath was only intended to fight for the 10th and 14th Amendments regarding illegal aliens. You guys fighting for some illegal aliens who haven't put a dime in this country. This falls on you.
We don't want illegals in our community. We don't want migrants terrorizing our own people. And to have y'all sit up here and say we have to accept $70 million being given to them when you got black people who are already struggling and need help, it is a disgrace.
It's a disgrace, absolute disgrace. I mean, can you even imagine how you would respond to that? What do you mean you don't want lawbreakers in your community? What do you mean you don't want illegal people living next to you? I mean, it is an absolute disgrace. I mean, not only non-citizens. I mean, if you think this through, it's not only non-citizens that are getting the priority here, but illegal non-citizens to boot. Illegal non-citizens are blatantly people who blatantly and knowingly and deliberately broke the law. They are being treated with more care and with more attention than are the tax-paying citizens. It is a disgrace. And this is why we're seeing so many voters in urban areas begin to turn to the right. It's been a phenomenon. It's been going on since 2020. But we are starting to see a very noticeable shift to the right among urban populations. New York City, particularly the Bronx, shifted right in 2024. Los Angeles, Miami actually went Republican. Miami-Dade went Republican for the first time, I believe, since 1984. Chicago, Las Vegas, Cleveland, El Paso, they all shifted right. And we just talked about the huge upset in Baton Rouge, Louisiana last weekend. A Republican did the unthinkable. He beat the incumbent Democrat in the mayoral race in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Baton Rouge, as I'm sure you've guessed, has been a solidly blue Democrat city. No longer. The electorate there, if you can believe it, swung an astonishing 21 points to the right after the Republican candidate promised to restore law and order to the city. Back on November 5th, the radically progressive district attorneys backed by George Soros, they lost 13 of the top 25 races across the nation, even in some of the deepest blue strongholds. What are you doing, Micah? Keep up with me. Keep up. I'm going too fast for our producer here, right? There you go. We got some connection there. For example, that included Republican turned independent Nathan Hochman in the city of Los Angeles. He crushed their ultra-liberal Soros-backed DA George Gascon by a humiliating 23 points. And what we're seeing here really is nothing less than a mass rejection, or an increasingly mass rejection among urban populations of the implementation of woke policies in the guise of what's commonly called as anarcho-tyranny, or more commonly called, I never heard it too much until a couple of years ago. And now more and more people are using that, which I'm really happy about. We've been talking about this a lot of late, especially in light of the whole Danny Penny acquittal. But as part of its political application, wokeness implements what's called an anarcho-tyrannical system. It's a strange combination of legal exemption for some. At the same time, you have legal weaponization for others. So it's a bizarre amalgamation of legalism and license. So anarcho-tyranny recasts the criminal as a victim and the law-abiding as criminals, since the law-abiding supposedly perpetuate a racist system by virtue of their acquiescence to the law, by virtue of their abiding by the law, right? Silence is compliance, right? Well, the irony here is that even urban populations are now ironically finding themselves on the wrong side, the tyrannical side of anarcho-tyranny, because now the oppressor binary is manifesting itself in non-citizen citizen terms, with the illegal non-citizen filling the role of victim, and they're victims of unjust laws and practices that urban voters, urban citizens inadvertently perpetuate. So obviously wokeness entails its own futility. It's an absolutely unsustainable system. And we can only hope that in view of its inevitable demise, that it too, like these increasing number of illegal migrants, will self-deport. Gang, as you know, we look out for each other on this channel. Your safety and your security are our #1 priority. So if you haven't secured the deed to your home as of yet, you need to click on that link below right now and protect yourself and your loved ones. I was absolutely shocked when I found out how easy it is to access the deed to my house, and not just access it, but actually change it. The deed to your home is the only document that proves you own it. But the problem is that all our deeds are now online, and criminals are free to find your deed, forge your signature, refile as the new homeowner, take out tons of loans using your home's equity, and then they stick you with all the debt. But that's where our good friends over at Home Title Lock come in. Gang, they're simply amazing. Home Title Lock gives you the peace of mind that the deed to your home is absolutely and completely protected 24/7. Click on that link below right now. Use promo code TurleyTalks. Then all you got to do is enter your address for your no obligation home title scan to see if you've already been a victim of deed theft. It's a $100 value, absolutely totally free with my promo code TurleyTalks. Gang, don't wait for the worst to happen only to regret you didn't do something about it when you could have. Do what I've done. Do what countless patriots have done. Click on that link below right now and secure your home today.
Plan to dismantle the deep state and reclaim our democracy from Washington corruption once and for all, and corruption it is. First, I will immediately reissue my 2020 executive order restoring the president's authority to remove rogue bureaucrats, and I will wield that power very aggressively. Second, we will clean out all of the corrupt actors in our national security and intelligence apparatus, and there are plenty of them. The departments and agencies that have been weaponized will be completely overhauled so that faceless bureaucrats will never again be able to target and persecute conservatives, Christians, or the left's political enemies, which they're doing now at a level that nobody can believe even possible. Third, we will totally reform FISA courts, which are so corrupt that the judges seemingly do not care when they are lied to in warrant applications. So many judges have seen so many applications that they know were wrong, or at least they must have known. They do nothing about it. They're lied to.
All right, gang, I often get asked the question, Dr. Steve, what YouTubers, what podcasters do you listen to, right? In other words, if I'm looking for some fresh analysis and insight into politics and culture, where do I go? Well, I am so excited, especially in light of what you just heard from President Trump, to introduce all of you to one of those influencers that I listen to and follow on a regular basis. Orrin McIntyre is the host of the Orrin McIntyre Show on The Blaze. He's a regular columnist, lecturer, and author. And his new book is an extraordinary read. It's entitled The Total State, How Liberal Democracies Become Tyrannies, which you can get by clicking on the link below. And don't just get one for yourself. Come on now. Makes a great Christmas gift for all those MAGA fans in your life. Orrin, welcome. It's an honor to have you here, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's seriously, I was geeking out with you just even before our interview here, dude. This was an excellent read. I'm serious. This was so good. And I'm so appreciative to you for writing it, because I think it unpacks step by step in a very pedagogical manner how those entrusted to protect our freedoms have turned into the single greatest threat to those freedoms. And I was wondering if you could begin where the book begins with a bit of a autobiographical perspective on how 2020 and the rise of the COVID police, just sort of awakened you to the total state. I mean, if you could give us just a brief overview, what changed in terms of your political perceptions as a result of that incredibly bizarre moment.
Sure. Like a lot of people who are probably watching this, I grew up as a talk radio conservative, listening to Rush Limbaugh and, learning in civics class how the Bill of Rights and the separation of powers would defend all of us from tyranny. And I totally believe that. I believe that that was exactly how our government worked. I was working as a local journalist during the first Trump presidency, and I started to see that the way that the media lied and manipulated different events shifted the actual function of the government. It wasn't just the formal laws, but so much of the government's efforts were put into trying to avoid or redirect the media, because that was ultimately what drove them to certain outcomes. And that was kind of my first clue that something was wrong. But then 2020 came, and all of a sudden, none of us could go to church, but strip clubs were open, and you couldn't go to the funeral of a dead loved one, but we had people rioting in the streets, and it just became very clear that the way that I understood the government, simply it wasn't the way that it worked. And so the book is really my intellectual journey, trying to go through some thinkers that are off the beaten path but are conservatives, and ultimately help us to better understand what happened and how we can avoid it.
It was so neat because just even reading that opening chapter, it's a lot like, I don't know why I think this way. It's the way my brain works. It's almost like a very good zombie movie, like 28 Days Later, that forces us to ask the question, who's the real monster here, right? So you got, we're told that there are all these monsters out there: totalitarianism, authoritarianism, communism, and so forth. But in movies like that, the supposed threat out there awakens the monsters within us. So it forces us to ask the question, who's the real threat here? Back in 2020, is it the virus, or is it what the virus was awakening, this ominous threat?
Yeah, I think so many of us would look at the American government and say, hey, we elected Donald Trump as president, so he's in charge, right? But then we looked at the pandemic, and it felt an awful lot like Anthony Fauci and maybe the media, maybe the World Health Organization were in charge, even though we had a formal government and knew the way that it was supposed to work. We weren't actually seeing events play out that way. And so I think watching something like that unfold really just shocks people awake, and they say, wait, too many of these organizations have too much power. They're overriding the president. How does this even work? I never voted for an Anthony Fauci, but he seems like the king of the United States in this moment. What do we do? And that's what I'm hoping the book does, is kind of unlock the process by which the experts took over our elected governance that is supposed to be representing us as the people.
You spell out the process brilliantly, chapter by chapter, and very patiently, but incredibly insightfully. I came across the term, one of the terms that I thought of reading your book, is this term virtual politics, to describe this kind of performative contradiction that involves saving democracy by destroying it, basically. And I don't know if you've been keeping tabs of what's been happening of late in Romania, with their Supreme Court canceling their presidential elections because this Orthodox traditionalist anti-NATO candidate Georgescu was set to win. They've got these 2 rounds of elections. He wins the first one. No one saw it. It was like, again, it's like Trump 2016. No one saw it among their elites saw it. And then right before the voters went to the polls for the second round, it looked like he was going to win and then take the presidency. Romanian officials came out with evidence that Russia was stealing the election by manipulating TikTok algorithms. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. So you notice they didn't come out with this evidence before the first round, because the globalist candidate was fully expected to win easily. It's literally their own Hillary Clinton 2016 scenario playing out, replete with accusations of Russia. But in this case, their Supreme Court actually went so far as to nullify Georgescu's win and cancel the election, all in the name of preserving democracy. And what you're arguing is that what you unpack is there's actually a logic to that virtual politics of this giving lip service to democracy, all the while actively undermining it. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Sure. When authority is clear, it's also accountable. When we know who is in charge, we know who to blame when something goes wrong. But if we can distribute authority, then it becomes harder and harder to hold it accountable. Now, in the United States, we're supposed to hold people accountable through elections. We believe that popular sovereignty is what actually selects our representatives. But if you are a ruling class and you want to stay in charge and you don't want to hand over your power just because a bunch of people in the middle country told you that they don't want you in power anymore, then the best way to control popular sovereignty is to control the information and the opinions of the people. If you can control the culture, control the education, then you can determine who's going to be in charge. And so you can go through this process of elections, the process of democracy, but knowing the whole time that you actually hold the outcome in your hand. And so that's why it's important to first manipulate people through control of the media. And of course, we can talk in detail if you want about social media and all the desperate need for every one of these managerial governments to try to crack down and censor social media up to and leading up to this election. But it's also control of the bureaucracy. It's making sure that every process goes through these bureaucratic institutions. So yes, technically you elected a bunch of people, but they're not experts in virology. They're not experts in medicine. They're not experts in warfare. They have to refer to the experts. And guess who owns the experts?
Right.
The ruling class.
The ruling class. Yeah. So the people we elect really, they're just the kabuki theater actors. And so the real directors of the play are behind the scenes, as it were. You mentioned that term, very key term in your book, managerialism. Can you develop how our society restructuring around this concept of managerialism, this rise of the credentialed class, which is so key to your analysis? By the way, let me finish the question. Can you explain how that relates to the total state? Because I just see the total state and the logic of managerialism as inextricably linked. But it reminded me very much of Joel Kotkin. I don't know if you came across this concept of neo-feudalism and this alliance between billionaires and bureaucrats in forming a managerial class. I think he tracks right along with what you're arguing, but he goes an independent route, and that's what I love. I love seeing that corroboration.
Yeah, a lot of people have come to a similar conclusion. I draw my line from James Burnham, who is a conservative political theorist that a lot of people don't think about much anymore, but he helped to found the National Review. He was a part of the conservative movement. And James Burnham wrote a book called The Managerial Revolution, in which he looked at the 1930s and said, look, I know we have Soviets, we have the communists, we have the fascists, the National Socialists, and then we have Western liberal democracies. And while there are differences between these governments, all of these governments are currently in the process of doing one thing, which is trying to massify and centralize the power of the government, whether it's FDR, Stalin, Hitler. They're all looking for a political formula that allows them to take all the resources, the production, the consumption, the military, the media. They want to centralize it and control it inside their countries. And he gave this form named managerialism. And basically the idea of managerialism is that too many of these large bureaucratic structures are complicated and can't be handled by the average business owner. And so instead, you need a new class of experts who will train in the efficient management of these bureaucracies, and they will be the ones that determine all these issues of process over time. And so while it looks a little different in Soviet Russia or in Nazi Germany or the United States, ultimately you are building the same structures at the core of your society. And that's why you hear so many people say, oh, well, the government's becoming more fascist. No, it's becoming more capitalist or communist. It's like, no, actually it's becoming more managerial. And what you're noticing is this managerial regime that seems similar across all of these different totalitarian states, because that's what's necessary to centralize that power.
So the difference is, when all said and done, we came up with a more sustainable managerialism than they were able to come up with. That's basically the difference. Yeah.
And we have the advantage of soft power, which is actually far less brittle. So we think of 1984 and these dystopian tyrannies, and that's what we think of. The jackboots are coming, but actually manipulation, you think of Brave New World, that's far more what we have now, and that manipulation is far more resilient than throwing everybody in a gulag. The gulag works for a time, but actually this version we have now is something that is much more robust over the years.
Yeah. I that's true. I never thought of the difference between Orwell and Huxley that way. That's brilliant. Our students at our classical school read both. They read both 84 and Brave New World, and then it's fun to ask which one do they like better and why. And that's cool. How the role of soft power in the Huxley work. One of the key themes throughout your book is, as you're just talking about here, is this central characteristic of modernity, the modern age coming into the Enlightenment. And that's this obsession with control, and particularly control by elites, summed up in this term of managerialism. We hear technocracy as well. Technology by its nature involves control. And so technocrats are, again, by their nature, engineers and operators of systems of control. I came across, in my notes, you contrasted that actually. I love this book. I'm told you I was going to geek out at this a little bit. You contrasted that with the political theory of the German jurist and political theorist Carl Schmitt, which I'm very happy you did. Is very good. It's very. I read very few works right now that bring out all of these frames of reference, these brilliant political minds, in a single coherent conversation. But you argued that, you pointed out Schmitt argued that politics is fundamentally, if I could dumb it all down, fundamentally about identifying friend from foe, friend-enemy distinction, absolutely essential. And you pointed out that liberalism is fundamentally about overcoming this friend-enemy distinction. And then you have this wonderful turn of phrase, by depoliticizing politics. That was, again, this is just stuff that makes me geek out. Can you develop that a little bit?
Sure. For most of us, we think of politics as this thing where people get on TV and debate each other. But Carl Schmitt says far more fundamentally, politics is an existential question. If you think about politics throughout history, it's who's going to control this land? Who is going to be the one in charge? Who is going to be the one giving orders? Who's going to be the one collecting taxes? And for you to have a political coalition, you need your friends versus your political enemies, right? This is the way in which you actually formulate that dynamic. But liberalism said, no, actually, we don't need to do that. We can take the big questions, the things people usually have wars over, things like religion and God, these kind of things. We can put all those big existential questions in the closet. And what we'll do is we'll create kind of this minimum viable morality. And we can all agree to this, and that'll allow us to trade and function, and it'll remove all these really nasty conflicts. And that way we can basically remove the political, the things that have classically defined politics. And instead we can make politics about process. It's really about just getting the right experts, the right data. There's no real clash of civilizations. There's no real clash of moral narratives. It's only about getting the experts to get it right, to do the science correctly. And this has been liberalism's big trick, because when we believe that, when we believe there is no friend-enemy distinction still operating, then we don't recognize that there are people who are imposing their will, that actually each one of these systems that we were told was neutral and depoliticized is itself actually something with an agenda. And I think that's what shocked people the most, to go back to our earlier discussion about the pandemic, because so many of these organizations that told them they were objective, they were medical organizations, public health, government, they're there for everybody, they're objective, they don't have an agenda, it's just doctors. What we found out is actually, no, every one of these people is political, and all of them are operating these institutions in their own interest for their own political agenda. They simply were able to advance that agenda under the shield of saying, oh, well, no, we're not political. And so whenever someone says we want to get the politics out of something, what they really mean is we want to institute our political agenda in a way that you cannot actually counter or have any input in. And I think that's what really Schmitt helps us to understand, that these neutral institutions were never neutral. And as long as we continue to operate like they are, then we are actually at the disadvantage, because they can play politics and we are put on the sideline.
Absolutely. Silence is compliance, right? We are totally playing the game and acquiescing to it. I mean, again, reading it, it made me think of literally the way our modern politics just functions as a kind of new priesthood, where with this managerial class, where they claim to possess every bit of sacred knowledge that was specific to them, that any bishop or prince would have by virtue of their ordination, their special charism. And I'm glad to see there's a growing recognition that scientists and technocrats very much perform the role of religion in a modern technocratic society. Who is it? You even quote him. Who's it that said all modern politics is basically just secularized religion?
Yeah,
Is that
both Joseph de Maistre and Carl Schmitt made that point.
Schmidt said, yeah.
That this is our political theology, that we have simply secularized our understanding of the good and turned it into something material. And that's ultimately what our experts are trying to do. Take the religious exemptions, take the religious authority, and translate it into a secular authority that you cannot question.
Yeah, so, right. Our modern technocratic society functions very much akin to Pharaoh's magicians. I mean,
Right.
there's really not much of a difference in the least. And you write as well about how expansion is baked into the cake of managerialism. How management isn't just totalizing in its attempt at control and centralization, but it's also expansive. It's always looking for new spheres of society to manage. And you talk about how this involves like redefining the family, redefining education, and in managerial terms. Can you flesh that out a bit?
Absolutely. So the relationship between dependence and sovereignty is very tight. If you're dependent on someone, they have a certain level of sovereignty over you. And none of us are completely independent. We are all parts of communities, families. We are not this man on an island. We're not in this original position that liberalism likes to create. Instead, we are in a scenario from our very birth where we're dependent on people. And when you're dependent on your family and your church and your community, then you're in organic and healthy relationships that don't feel like an artificial totalitarian state. But the more the state can capture those responsibilities, the more it can also capture the power that comes with their dependency. So we used to educate our children. We used to take care of our poor. We used to take care of our elderly. But guess what? Now the state educates our children, and they take care of the poor, and they take care of the elderly. And each one of these responsibilities that government captures means that it also gains power over each one of these spheres. And once the government has covered all of these different spheres, once it's penetrated every social sphere, then ultimately it becomes totalitarian, which is why every totalitarian government goes after the family, right? Whether it's Soviet Russia or Nazi Germany, I want the kid informing on the parents. Why? Because if I can break the most fundamental bond, the most fundamental dependency, then I control everybody. And that's what every totalitarian state is actually aiming for.
Yeah, I was thinking of Patrick Deneen's, Why Liberalism Failed. That's that notion that redefining how liberalism redefines the human person as a sovereign individual with no moral obligations to anything or anyone apart from that which he or she chooses to impose upon themselves, and then that by its nature marginalize all the intermediary institutions of family and church and community and guild and the like, and then nature abhors a vacuum, and so the state comes in and takes over virtually all of those mediating institutions. It's I want to go back. I'm sorry, I skipped because I'm trying to go chronologically in your book. Because I really like, and I want my audience to be introduced to this concept. I've come across it before, but I guess it's and this is Curtis Yarvin's work, and I guess I haven't read enough of Yarvin, but you explained this notion of the cathedral brilliantly, and I finally went, oh, okay, so this is what I've heard Yarvin use cathedral all the time, and I didn't quite understand it in its context, so I never wanted to use it in analysis because I figured I was going to use it wrong, which I would have, I'm sure. But you draw on this, if I recall, earlier in the book, and it's this notion of the cathedral, which, if I understand it right, is basically the cultural connective tissue of the management class. So there's not a single evil genius behind the scenes pulling the strings. Soros may be evil, but he's just a player. He's just a choir boy in this cathedral. Can you explain that a bit?
Sure. If you were dropped into a society in the 1300s or the 1400s, everyone would go to church on the same day, and their businesses would be closed at the same time, and they had the same festivals, and whenever they tried to explain a moral argument or a reason for something, they would explain it in very Christian language. And if you were just dropped in there, you wouldn't think, oh, this is a conspiracy, right? You wouldn't think that this is some top-down conspiracy. You would understand that they were all using the same language because they all went to the same church. They all attended the same cathedral, hence the name of it. And the cathedral is the cultural and religious and academic influence across all of society. It's the way in which everyone frames every discussion and how they share each other's values. And so Curtis Yarvin is pointing out that a lot of modern people think we got rid of the cathedral. The church is gone as the center of life, and we don't have anything that defines us that way. But that's not true. In fact, we have the modern academia, we have our businesses, our news media, and they all share the same culture. They all share the same set of ideas. They all share the same moral vision, because the elite class that governs them all has to attend the same colleges. They all read the same books. They breathe the same air. And so when George Soros is making a decision, or Harvard is making a decision, or Yale is making a decision, these things should probably be different, but instead they all seem to link up. And it's not because every one of them is getting some kind of message from the Illuminati telling them exactly what to believe, though there is obviously a level of coordination. The WEF is real. These organizations do exist. Right. But the reason that we consistently see this up and down all of these organizations almost simultaneously is because they are operating from that same value set, that cathedral, the modern cathedral of progressive secular humanism. They have basically their own religion, and their religion informs every one of their decisions. And that's why they're able to stay on the same agenda.
Yeah, it's why I found that paradigm of sort of this neo-feudalism so fascinating, because it combines the massive amount of power and affluence accumulating in the hands of less and less people, billionaire and bureaucrats, sort of coming together, a House of Lords, as it were, that owns everything, and we're servants and we're happy, and that they impose that system religiously through not so much a clerical class, but a clerisy class, and a class of university professors, the legacy media, bureaucrats, and the like that make up the establishment. That's brilliant. I mean, it just, again, one of the reasons why I love reading books like this is that it just has so much overlap, and it makes me see connections that I haven't seen before. And one of them, which I loved, was your discussion of C.S. Lewis and his work, The Abolition of Man, which I cannot recommend more to people. It's a hard read. I prepare them for it, but in under 100 pages, I can't think of a better overview of just the soul, if there is one, of the modern world, as it were. One of the most influential books of my life. And that's where you talk about how education plays a role in perpetuating the total state. Can you flesh that out for us?
Absolutely. One of the things that managerialism wants to do is create a blank slate, right? We as human beings are arising from a substrate of culture, tradition, religion, language. We are different peoples, and those different peoples are grounded in something real and organic. And that makes us hard to control in the same way, because we have real and significant differences from each other. You have to rule people in the United States differently than you do in, something like Germany or a place like Japan or China. These are just very different understandings of the way we should live lives, and therefore it's very hard to produce one set of standards or skills that will go ahead and effectively govern all of us. But that's exactly what managerialism wants to do. As we said before, it's all about centralizing into mass bureaucracies, and every managerial bureaucracy generates its efficiency by making people the same. It's just like an assembly line, right? You don't want a bunch of different screws and different operations and different widgets. You want everything uniform so you can get the best output. And this is just a assembly line for people. So what C.S. Lewis was pointing out in The Abolition of Man is that the education system, and this is even back in his time in the 1940s, was stripping out the passion and particularity of individual people and looking to make a uniform human being, one that could be a blank slate and could have the managerial class. He didn't use that exact words because it didn't exist at that time. But
called them conditioners, if I recall, right? Yeah,
the social engineers, right? These people were trying to engineer the perfect subject for the new ruling class by stripping out all of the good and the beautiful and the true, the transcendent, and instead reducing us to these very base material forms. And he warned us that over time, if they were able to completely move all of the things that were human out of the domain of the metaphysical and into the domain of the material, we would actually abolish man. We would have a generation that forgets what it means to be a person. And actually, it's funny, we were talking about 1984 and Brave New World and which one was correct, but actually That Hideous Strength, which is his sci-fi novelization of the book, is the best dystopia. That is actually what we live in. That has the deepest insights for the world we're living in today, because it's taking all of his insights from that book and moving it into the fictional realm.
Oh man, you get we are simpatico. We are going in the same direction. Where did he get that line, That Hideous Strength? Do you know where he got that title?
I don't.
From a 16th century poem by Sir David Lindsay that describes the Tower of Babel, which is how you begin your book.
Well, there you go. I didn't even realize that connection, but that's amazing, because yeah, that's a huge theme throughout the bok.
Oh, I told you we were going to geek out over this, guys. I'm sorry. I did. First page I turned on Oren's book. I knew this was going to be great because he started it just the way C.S. Lewis would literally have started it. So yeah, That Hideous Strength from a 16th century poem describing precisely the very first words of your book. It was just brilliant. So you're tracking right in line with some pretty amazing minds there. So
that's good company. Yeah, I won't be.
Yeah, that's good company for sure. Now you end your book with a note of hope. You argue that this managerial project is ultimately doomed because its quest for total control actually entails its own demise. Its technocratic logic entails its own futility. I was wondering if you could explain that a bit.
Sure. If we look at what's happening in the world around us, we've seen that scale has had a pretty good run, right? Centralizing and massifying things has made people more and more rich and more powerful and all of these things. But we're starting to see the limitations of that. It's starting to crack up. The supply lines aren't working the way that it's used to. We're hiring people not for their competency, but for their conformity with the regime. And ultimately, we're undermining all of the things that allowed us to scale up to this point. And that's because humans aren't meant to be governed this way. We're not meant to be governed by this overwhelming centralized technocratic power. The world is mystical and magical, and we are real people who have a destiny that is far beyond our own, spreadsheet existence and managerial existence. And so that means that this thing has a time limit on it. There's only so high that the Tower of Babel can build itself up before it inevitably comes apart. And I believe we're starting to see this as we see the different resistance. I had you on my show to talk about your own book and the different way that, populist movements are breaking out and as people push back against what's happening here. So we're seeing at an organizational and technical level where it's failing, and we're also seeing a political level where it's failing. And now you listen to guys like J.D. Vance and Vivek Ramaswamy and even Elon Musk, and guess what they're talking about doing? Dismantling the managerial state. And so this has made its way even into our real life politics. Isn't some, crackpot outside theory. The guys who are now in the hot seat in the United States recognize the deleterious effect that this is having on our future, and they want to start taking it apart. So I think that, in my book, I predict that things will start failing and we start regionalizing because we have to scale back what we're doing now. Though I hope with the election of Donald Trump, perhaps we can have a more hopeful ending here where he works hard with Vivek and others to dismantle many of these and push so much of the power that has been centralized in bureaucracies back to the states and back to the people so that we can resume our own governance in our localities and regions. But that does require a big thing for us. We have to become more virtuous. Everyone from Aristotle to Alexis de Tocqueville knew that a civic virtue was the building block of a free people. And if we hand all of our responsibilities over to the total state and the total state vanishes tomorrow, we don't know how to govern ourselves. And so we have to return to being a people who can govern ourselves by taking responsibility for those very communal aspects of our existence that we've handed over to the government.
Brilliant. I mean, again, I was going to go exactly there based on November 5th. What would you recommend? I love where you went with that in terms of the return of virtue, and that is wisdom and virtue. I mean, that's it. I mean, how else do we govern? How else do we become a self-governing people? And I'm just going back to Abolition of Man, the way C.S. Lewis talked about how virtue is training the affections rightly. It's learning to love rightly. So I talk to my students about, I said, well, look, it's good to love a baby, and it's good to love a ham sandwich. And if they're both on a pedestal and they're both falling together and you rush to save the ham sandwich, that's a bad. And I said, why is that a bad? They were both good, right? But why is that a bad? Because the baby was infinitely more good than the ham sandwich. So what I did is I dislodged my loves from God's economy of goods. And the brilliance of Lewis is he recognized that if you define the true, the good, and the beautiful out of existence in the transcendent eternal realm, if you as the modern world does, as managerial class intends to, if you get rid of the true, the good, and the beautiful, then you've gotten rid of the very basis for virtue, because then there's nothing with which to align my loves. And the Latin etymology of virtue is vir, man, right? So if you abolish the true, the good, and the beautiful, you abolish virtue. You abolish virtue, abolition of man.
Yeah, one of the worst things that happened to our vocabulary in modernity is that we replaced virtue with the word freedom. And those are not the same things. Virtue is in classic sense, liberty was the idea that you could pursue something, a virtuous end. An ordered liberty was one that pursued a specific understanding of the good. A drug addict is free to do all the drugs that he wants, but he's not living a virtuous life. He is not he does not have liberty in that sense. And so we have to return to an understanding of not just pursuing freedom for its own sake, but pursuing liberty because it orders our loves and helps us arrive at an understanding of the good that betters our community and ourselves.
So good, Orrin. Gosh, I could talk to you for hours. Hopefully one day we'll be able to sit down and chat into the wee hours. Orrin McIntyre of The Blaze. The book is entitled The Total State, How Liberal Democracies Become Tyrannies. You can get it by just clicking on the link below. If you want to take your political analysis to the next level, several levels up, this is it. And he does. And what makes Orrin so wonderful, he's a pedagogue by heart. He's a teacher. He walks you through it. He wants to make sure you understand it, get it, digest it, as it were, and make it a part of your life. So, because the more of us who think this way, the less the total state could ever resurface again. Orrin, a very Merry Christmas to you. Thank you for writing this book. It was an honor having you on the show, and let's chat again real soon, my friend.
Absolutely. Merry Christmas to you and yours.
Thank you. We all have an opportunity to finally stop big tech and government overreach. It's happening, gang. Patriots are reclaiming our privacy, and you have no better way of protecting yourself than with SLNT. That's short for silent. Silent's Faraday products block all incoming and outgoing signals so no one can get their hands on your information. From key FOBs to phones and laptops, simply place your device inside, close the sleeve, and that's it. You're off the grid and safeguarded from unauthorized access. Go silent today by clicking on that link below or going to slnt.com/Turley to save 15% plus free shipping on all qualifying orders. Stay ahead of what's coming and secure your privacy today. Again, that's slnt.com/Turley for 15% off and free shipping on all qualified orders. slnt.com/Turley.